Close your eyes and listen. Let the room around you grow quiet. Tonight, I have a story for you. And when it is over, you may not feel quite so alone in the dark. One, the button, above 11. I had lived in the building for almost 3 years before I noticed the extra button. It was not an unusual building. There were 11 floors, a basement laundry room, and a narrow lobby with a row of metal mailboxes. A plastic plant stood beside the front door. Its leaves had collected a soft grey layer of dust. I lived on the 9th floor. Most evenings, I came home tired enough that the elevator ride felt like part of the process of falling asleep. I would tap my key fob against the reader. The lock would click. Then I would cross the lobby, press the call button, and wait beneath the weak ceiling lights. The elevator was old, but not dangerously old. It had brushed metal walls and a scratched mirror at the back. The floor was black rubber. It always smelled faintly of dust, warm wiring, and the lemon cleaner used by the building staff. The buttons ran in 2 straight columns. There was B for the basement, L for the lobby, then the numbers 2 through 11. The 9th floor button had a pale mark beside it where I had touched it thousands of times. I knew that panel without ever studying it. I knew the small pause before the doors closed. I knew the soft click behind the wall when the elevator began to move. I knew the low electric hum that changed in pitch as the car passed each floor. Sometimes I shared the ride with neighbors. There was a woman from the 5th floor who carried a small white dog under one arm. A quiet man from 10 often came home with grocery bags. Delivery drivers stepped inside while checking apartment numbers on their phones. Nothing strange ever happened. Then, one evening, the elevator stopped between the 8th and 9th floors. I had been looking at my phone. I felt the car slow, so I put it back in my pocket. The display above the door showed 8. The number went dark. For a few seconds, nothing replaced it. The elevator continued to rise. The motor made its usual sound, but the ride felt longer than the distance between 2 floors. I could feel a faint vibration through the soles of my shoes. The metal handrail was colder than it should have been. Then the elevator chimed. The doors opened. I expected to see the 9th floor hallway. Instead, I saw a hallway that looked almost like the 8th floor. The carpet was the same dull brown. The walls were painted the same pale color. There was a framed print near the elevator showing a gray lake under a cloudy sky. Still, something was wrong. The ceiling seemed lower. The hallway was colder. The air smelled like wet concrete and old coins. I could not see any apartment numbers. There were doors, but the small metal plates beside them were blank. I stayed inside. The doors remained open for several seconds. Nothing moved in the hallway. I heard no television, no plumbing, and no footsteps. Then the doors closed. The display showed 9, and the elevator rose for less than a second before stopping again. This time, the doors opened onto my floor. I went to my apartment and locked the door behind me. I told myself the elevator had opened on the 8th floor. I had been tired. Perhaps the hallway lights had made the number plates difficult to see. That explanation worked until the following evening. I entered the elevator carrying a paper bag of takeout. The bottom of the bag was warm against my palm. The smell of roasted garlic filled the small metal space. I pressed 9. As the button lit, I noticed another button above 11. It was marked 12. I looked at it for a long time. The button matched the others. It was the same size and shape. It had the same narrow metal rim and the same cloudy plastic surface. But the building did not have a 12th floor. There was nothing above 11 except the roof, the elevator machinery, and a small utility room that tenants could not access. I leaned closer. The number was printed in the same simple typeface as the others. Below it was a row of raised dots. I ran my thumb over them. The dots felt sharper than the braille markings on the other buttons. The surface of the button was cold, not cool from the air inside the elevator. Cold enough that the skin of my thumb began to ache. I pulled my hand away. The doors closed, and the elevator carried me to 9 without stopping. The next morning, I checked the panel on my way to work. The 12 button was gone. Above 11, there was only a narrow strip of brushed metal. I touched it. The panel was smooth. There were no screw holes and no outline where a button might have been removed. I took a picture with my phone. Then I went downstairs and checked again before leaving the building. Nothing had changed. For the next few days, the elevator behaved normally. I began to feel embarrassed by how much I had thought about it. Elevators were machines. Machines made mistakes. Displays failed. Doors opened on the wrong floor. A button could not appear and disappear, but memory was less reliable than metal. That weekend, I mentioned it to the man from the 10th floor. We were riding down together. He had 2 reusable grocery bags at his feet. One was filled with canned soup. The cans clicked softly against each other as the elevator moved. "Was there ever a 12th floor button in here?" I asked. He looked at the panel. "No," he said. His answer came quickly. Then he looked at me, and I noticed that his expression had changed. It was only a small change. His mouth had tightened. His eyes stayed on my face for a moment too long. "Why?" he asked. "I thought I saw one." He picked up his bags before we reached the lobby. "Probably the light," he said. He left without saying goodbye. The extra button returned 3 nights later. This time it was already lit when I entered the elevator. The number 12 glowed a weak yellow. The light seemed to pulse with the vibration of the motor. I pressed 9. The 9th floor button lit, but the doors did not close. I pressed it again, then I pressed the door close button. Nothing happened. The elevator remained open to the lobby. Behind me, the front door gave a soft rattle as the wind moved against it. The plastic plant shifted slightly in the draft. After several seconds, the 12 button went dark. The doors closed at once. The elevator rose. It passed the 2nd floor, then the 3rd. The motor sounded strained. Each number appeared on the display and faded. When it reached 9, it did not stop. The button beside my floor remained lit, but the elevator continued upward. 11. Then the display showed 12. The number was brighter than the others. The elevator slowed so gently that I barely felt it. There was a soft mechanical click. The doors began to open. Cold air entered through the widening gap. The hallway outside was the same one I had seen before. Pale walls, brown carpet, blank number plates. This time I could see farther. The corridor extended in both directions. It was much longer than the building itself. The ceiling lights faded into the distance, each one a little dimmer than the one before it. A delivery box sat outside the nearest door. It was an ordinary cardboard box. One corner had been crushed. A white shipping label was fixed to the top. I recognized the name on it. It belonged to the woman across from my apartment. I could not read the address from inside the elevator, but I could see the apartment number printed in large type. 9D. The doors stayed open. I pressed 9. The button did not respond. I pressed the lobby button. Then the emergency call button. Neither lit up. The air outside had a damp, metallic smell. It seemed to settle on my tongue. Far down the corridor, something chimed. It was the sound of another elevator arriving. A second chime followed from the opposite direction. Then another came from somewhere behind the walls. The sounds continued at slow, uneven intervals. Each was slightly different. Some were high and clear, others were low and worn out. I began pressing the door close button. I did not hit it wildly. I pressed it once, waited, and pressed it again. The plastic was strangely soft beneath my fingertip. It felt warm, almost like skin warmed beneath a blanket. I stopped touching it. The doors began to close. Just before the gap disappeared, One of the blank metal plates beside the nearest apartment door caught the light. For a moment I thought I saw a number forming beneath its surface. It looked like a 9. Then the doors sealed and the elevator dropped. The descent was fast enough to make my stomach feel light, but there was no sudden movement. The car simply seemed to lose weight. The display remained on 12. When the doors opened again, I was on my floor. The woman in 9D had a cardboard delivery box outside her apartment. One corner was crushed. The label was positioned near the top. I did not go close enough to compare it. I went inside, locked my door, and placed the chair beneath the handle. I knew the chair would not stop anyone with a key. It still made me feel better. The next morning, I submitted a maintenance request through the building's website. I described the incorrect stops and the extra button. I did not mention the hallway or the package. A technician came that afternoon. He opened the control panel and examined the wiring. I stood in the lobby while he tested the elevator several times. He rode it to every floor. He checked the doors and the display. The 12 button did not appear. He told me the elevator was functioning normally. 2 days later, the maintenance request was marked as resolved. After that, I started using the stairs. 9 floors felt longer than I expected. The stairwell smelled of dry concrete, old paint, and laundry detergent. The lighting was harsh. The heavy doors closed with a solid sound behind me. But the stairs did not change. Each landing had a number painted on the wall. Each flight had the same 11 steps, followed by a turn and another 11. I began leaving home a little early in the mornings. At night, I climbed slowly. By the 7th floor, my legs usually hurt. By the 9th, my shirt would be damp beneath my coat. It was inconvenient. It was also predictable. I noticed other people using the stairs more often. The man from 10 passed me one morning with his grocery bags. He nodded, but did not ask why I was there. A delivery driver rested on the 6th floor landing, holding a drink carrier in both hands. He looked exhausted. "Elevator broken?" I asked. He stared through the small, wide glass window in the stairwell door. "No," he said. "It just took me to the wrong place." "What floor?" He stood up. "I'm taking the stairs," he said. That was the end of the conversation. The building sent all tenants an email a week later. It said the elevator had passed a complete safety inspection. The message apologized for any inconvenience caused by irregular floor selection. I read that phrase several times. There was no explanation of what it meant. At night, I could hear the elevator from my apartment. The machinery ran through the wall beside my bedroom. I had always heard it, but I had never paid attention before. There was the rising hum, the soft drag of the cables, and the muted chime when it stopped on my floor. Sometimes the doors opened. I would wait for footsteps in the hallway. Often there were none. The doors would remain open for 10 or 15 seconds. Then they would close, and the elevator would move again. Over time, more people began using the stairs. No one discussed it. We passed each other on the landings with laundry baskets, backpacks, grocery bags, and cups of coffee. We nodded. We stepped aside. We held the doors open. It became a quiet habit shared by people who pretended not to share it. Last week, I found a strip of masking tape stuck to the wall beside the 9th floor stairwell door. Someone had written on it in black ink, "If you see the new button, don't let it know which floor is yours." The writing was small and careful. The next morning, the tape was gone. A pale rectangle remained where it had been. I still take the stairs. I no longer press the elevator call button. I do not look through its open doors when I cross the lobby. If someone is waiting for it, I walk past without warning them. I used to feel guilty about that. Then, 3 nights ago, I heard the elevator stop on my floor. The doors opened. No footsteps followed. After a while, there was a quiet electronic beep. It was the sound a button makes when someone presses it. The doors stayed open for almost a minute, then they closed. Since that night, it has returned several times. It comes to the 9th floor without being called. It opens its doors and waits. This evening, I found another strip of masking tape outside my apartment. It had been placed directly beneath the peephole. The handwriting was different from the first note. There were only 6 words. IT doesn't need the button anymore. The ramp below. P3. I used to park in the same space every day. It was on P2, beside a square concrete pillar marked C47. The number was painted in white over a wide blue stripe. There was a fire door behind it and a security camera above it. I chose that space because it was easy to remember. C47. 2 rows from the elevators. Turn left at the payment machine, walk past the red pipe, and my car would be on the right. The underground garage belonged to the office building where I worked. It had 3 levels. P1 was reserved for visitors. Most employees used P2. P3 was larger, colder, and usually half empty. There was no P4. I knew the garage well enough to move through it without thinking. In the mornings, I lowered my window, tapped my access card against the reader, and waited for the barrier to rise. At night, I followed the green EXIT signs back to the ramp. The place always smelled the same. Damp concrete, old oil, warm rubber, exhaust trapped in the low ceiling. The fluorescent lights produced a steady electrical hum. Tires made a soft, dry sound over the painted floor. Car doors closed with echoes that seemed to travel much farther than they should. None of it bothered me. A parking garage is not a place where people expect to stay. You enter, leave your car, and forget about it. That may be why so few people look closely at one. I did not look closely until the evening my car moved. I left the office later than usual. Most of the building was dark. When the elevator opened on P2, cold air moved against my face. I walked past the payment machine and turned left. C47 was empty. There was a dark oil stain where my car should have been. It had the shape of a long, narrow island. The concrete beneath it looked damp. I stood there with my keys in my hand. I pressed the lock button. A faint chirp answered from farther down the row. I followed the sound and found my car beside C52. The doors were locked. The windows were closed. Nothing inside had been disturbed. I checked my phone. I sometimes took a picture of the pillar when I parked in an unfamiliar section. That morning, I had not. There was no reason anyone would have moved the car. I still had both keys. I told myself I had parked in the wrong place. It was a simple mistake. I had been tired that morning. I had been listening to a podcast. I might have driven several spaces farther without noticing. I left the garage and forgot about it before I reached home. The next morning, I parked beside C47 again. This time, I took a picture. The image showed the blue pillar, the white number, and the left side of my car. The time was visible in the corner of the screen. That evening, the car was beside C49. I checked the picture twice. Then I looked back toward C47. The oil stain was still there. I walked around the car. I touched the hood. It was cold. The tires were dusty. There were no fresh marks on the doors. My access card was still in the cup holder. I spoke to the security guard in the lobby. He was polite, but he seemed confused by the question. He checked the computer and told me my card had entered the garage that morning. There was no record of it leaving. I asked if anyone could move a vehicle without recording it. He said they could tow one, but they had not towed mine. The camera above C47 was not working. It had been waiting for replacement for several weeks. He suggested I write down the space number in the future. I did not tell him about the photograph. For the rest of that week, I parked on P1. It cost more, but the visitor level was brighter. There were painted arrows on every corner. Music played through small ceiling speakers near the elevators. nothing moved. On Monday, the visitor section was full. I returned to P2 and chose a space in row D, far from C47. I photographed the pillar and the surrounding cars. At the end of the day, my car was exactly where I had left it. I felt relieved. That feeling lasted until I began driving toward the exit. The nearest sign pointed left. I followed it past a row of parked vehicles and turned up the ramp. The ramp curved gently. At the top, I expected the barrier and the security booth. Instead, I saw the pillar marked D18. It was the same pillar I had passed before entering the ramp. I stopped the car. The engine idled. The ventilation system pushed cold air through the garage. Somewhere above me, water moved through a pipe. I checked the mirrors. The ramp behind me sloped downward exactly as it should. I drove forward again. I followed 3 green exit signs. Each pointed toward the same ramp. The second time I reached the top, I returned to D118. My odometer showed that I had driven almost half a mile. I lowered the window. The air outside smelled of exhaust and wet stone. The fluorescent hum seemed louder without the glass between us. I could hear another engine somewhere nearby. It was moving slowly. The sound rose and faded as if a car were circling the same row. I never saw its headlights. I drove back toward the elevators. The row numbers no longer followed the correct order. D18 was followed by D19. Then came D24, D20, and D21. The numbers were not damaged. They were painted neatly on the pillars. The white paint looked old and slightly yellow. I passed a fire door with an illuminated EXID sign above it. I parked and tried the handle. The door opened onto a concrete stairwell. A blue sign on the wall read P2. The stairs went up and down. I climbed one flight. The next landing also said P2. I went up again. P2. The third landing had no door. There was only a clean rectangle in the wall where one should have been. The paint inside the rectangle was darker than the rest. I returned to the garage. My car was still waiting beside the fire door. Its headlights were on. I was sure I had turned them off. I got inside and locked the doors. My phone had no signal. The navigation app showed a blank grey screen. A small blue dot marked my position, but there were no roads around it. I sat there for several minutes. I remember thinking that panic would not help. It seemed important to remain calm. The garage had entrances. It had exits. It occupied a limited amount of space beneath a building. Those were facts. At the time, I still believed facts were stronger than whatever was happening. I started driving again. After several turns, I found a ramp marked P3. I went down. P3 was colder than P2. Most of the lights were off. Each working tube cast a pale pool across the floor. There were cars parked along the walls. Some were covered in dust. Others looked recently used. A silver sedan had a paper coffee cup in the holder. A child's jacket lay across the back seat of a blue hatchback. I did not see any people. The arrows on the floor pointed in both directions. I followed the ones marked EXIT. After one slow circle, I returned to the same silver sedan. The second circle brought me past 2 silver sedans. They were the same model and color. Both had paper cups in the front holder. One had a scratch above the rear wheel. The other did not. I continued driving. The next ramp was not marked P2. A black and white sign above it read P4. I stopped before the slope. The garage had 3 levels. I had seen the plans posted near the elevators. P3 was the lowest floor. Beneath it were foundations, drainage tanks, and earth. The P4 ramp descended into a wide area of shadow. The lights below were spaced far apart. I could see pillars, but not the far wall. I put the car in reverse. The warning camera showed the empty ramp behind me. White guidelines curved across the screen. For a moment, Another pair of headlights appeared at the very edge of the image. They were low and distant. I turned around. There was nothing behind the car. When I looked at the dashboard again, the camera showed only concrete. I reversed until I reached the P3 level. Then I turned left. The P4 sign was in front of me again. I had not completed a circle. I had driven less than 20 yards. I turned right. The same ramp waited beyond the next row of pillars. I tried a third direction, P4. The signs were identical, but the concrete around them changed. One ramp had a red pipe above it. Another had a security camera. A third had a dark trail of water running down the center. All of them led lower. I began to understand that the garage was not rearranging itself in the way a puzzle rearranges. A puzzle still has edges. This place had stopped admitting that edges were necessary. I thought about how easily I had accepted the garage before. I had believed P2 was above P3 because the sign said so. I believed the exit existed because arrows pointed toward it. I had mistaken familiarity for knowledge. That was the worst part. Nothing had changed except my ability to notice. I'd been happy when the garage was only a garage. Ignorance had given it walls. Ignorance had kept the levels in order and placed the street above the ceiling. Now I knew there was something below P3. Knowing did not make it clearer. It only made the ordinary explanation impossible. I finally drove down the ramp. P4 looked almost the same as P3. The ceiling was lower. The pillars had no numbers. The security cameras faced the walls. There were more vehicles here. Dozens of them stood in neat rows. Some had parking permits hanging from their mirrors. Several belonged to companies in my building. I recognized a white pickup I often saw in P2. Its driver's door was open. The cabin light had gone dim. I did not stop. The painted arrows led me deeper into the garage. Every few minutes, I passed a green EXI'd sign. The arrows always pointed forward. My fuel gauge began to drop. The car clock did not change. I drove past the same gray pillar many times. There was a small handprint in its dust. Each time I saw it, the handprint seemed a little lower. I kept my eyes on the road. Eventually, I saw red lights ahead. Another car was moving through the rows. I followed it. It was a blue hatchback. The child's jacket was still across the back seat. The driver was only a dark shape behind the glass. We drove for several minutes. The hatchback never accelerated. It never signaled. It simply followed the arrows. Then it turned behind a pillar. When I reached the turn, the car was gone. In its place was an upward ramp. A green sign above it read, "Street." I drove up. The ramp seemed much longer than the others. The engine worked hard against the slope. Pale light appeared ahead. The barrier rose before I reached it. I passed beneath it and emerged outside. It was raining. The office building stood behind me. Street lights reflected on the wet road. Cars moved through the intersection. Everything looked normal. I pulled over and turned off the engine. My hands were cold and stiff around the steering wheel. According to my phone, less than 15 minutes had passed. The fuel gauge was nearly empty. I never parked beneath that building again. I began taking the train. On rainy days, I carried an umbrella. On late evenings, I waited beneath the lobby lights with other tired people. I told no one what happened. It was easier to let the garage become ordinary again, at least from a distance. Several months later, the entrance to P3 was closed. A temporary sign said maintenance work was in progress. The barrier remained down for weeks. Still, I sometimes heard cars below the building. The sound traveled through the lobby floor. Tires turned across concrete. Engines rose and faded. Occasionally, someone pressed a horn. The security guard said sounds carried strangely underground. I accepted that answer. I wanted to accept it. Yesterday evening, I left work during heavy rain. Water ran across the sidewalk and into the garage entrance. The digital sign above the barrier said full. The garage was supposed to be closed. As I walked past, an intercom beside the entrance produced a burst of static. A man's voice came through the speaker. He sounded calm and very tired. He said he had followed the exit signs 3 times. He said he kept returning to the same pillar. There was a pause. Then another voice spoke behind him. It was farther from the intercom. I could barely hear it over the sound of running engines. It asked if anyone knew the way back to P3. More voices answered from somewhere in the garage. None of them agreed on which direction was up. I kept walking. At the corner, I looked back once. Far below the lowered barrier, a line of headlights moved through the darkness. The first pair turned behind a concrete wall. A few seconds later, the same headlights appeared again. Then another pair followed. Then another. The line continued after I could no longer count the cars. The sign above the entrance still said, full, full. For a moment, one final word appeared beneath it. It was small, and I may have read it incorrectly. BW. Three, the desk at the end of the row. I was usually the last person to leave the office. It was not because I loved my job. I was simply slow, and the work never seemed to end at the same time the day did. By 6, people began closing laptops and putting on coats. Someone would call goodnight from the elevator. Someone else would stand near the doors, finishing a conversation while already holding a bag. By 7, the office became quiet. The air conditioning continued to hum above the ceiling tiles. The printer woke every few minutes and adjusted something inside itself. Fluorescent lights clicked off in empty meeting rooms. I liked those hours. During the day, our floor was full of voices, phone calls, and notification sounds. At night, I could hear the soft movement of my own sleeves across the desk. I could hear the water cooler release bubbles into its bottle. There were 17 people on my team. I knew where everyone sat. Our desks were arranged in 3 long rows. My desk was near the middle, across from the small meeting room. The printer stood at the far end of the last row. Beside it was a narrow space where we kept recycling bins and spare boxes of paper. That was the part of the office that changed. The first time I noticed it, I was working late on a Thursday. Most of the lights had gone into power saving mode. Every second row was dark. Beyond the windows, the glass reflected the office back at me. I heard someone typing. The sound came from the far end of the room. It was slow and steady. 3 or 4 keys at a time, followed by a pause. Then another short group. I thought it was Daniel from accounting. He often stayed late during reporting periods. I stood up and looked over the dividers. A man was sitting at a desk beside the printer. The desk should not have been there. It occupied the narrow space where we kept the recycling bins. There was a monitor, a keyboard, a phone, and a small grey filing cabinet. A blue coffee mug stood near the edge. The man wore a pale shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He had short dark hair and a narrow face. He looked tired in an ordinary way. He noticed me watching. "Still here?" he asked. His voice was quiet. Friendly even. "Just finishing something," I said. "Same?" He looked back at his monitor. I remained standing. There was a nameplate on the divider beside him. Even Mercer. The letters were printed in the same black type as every other nameplate in the office. I sat down again. For the next 20 minutes I tried to remember when the desk had been installed. I could not. There had been recycling bins in that space. I remembered carrying a box there after clearing old files from my cabinet. I remembered the printer technician complaining that the space was too narrow for his equipment. There had never been a desk. When I left, Evan was still typing. He raised one hand as I passed. "Have a good night," he said. I returned the gesture. It felt easier than asking who he was. The next morning, the office was busy. People stood near the coffee machine. The smell of burnt coffee and warm carpet filled the room. The desk was still there. Evan sat beneath the full daylight from the windows. He wore a dark sweater. Several sticky notes had appeared around his monitor. I asked my supervisor about him. "Who's Evan Mercer?" I said. She glanced toward his desk. "Evan?" "Yes." "What do you mean? What team is he on?" She looked at me as if I had asked which floor we worked on. "He's with reporting." "For how long?" "I don't know. A few years." I waited for her to smile. She did not. "He was here before you," she added. That was impossible. I had been there for 4 years. I knew every person who had joined and every person who had left. I had helped move the desks when our team expanded. There had never been an Evan. At lunch, he sat with several coworkers in the break room. They spoke to him naturally. Daniel asked if he had finished a spreadsheet. Someone offered him part of a sandwich. Evan laughed at something I could not hear. No one introduced us. I checked the employee directory after lunch. Evan's profile was there. The photograph showed the same narrow face. His position was listed as Senior Reporting Analyst. His extension appeared beside his email address. The profile did not show a start date. I searched his name in Slack. There were hundreds of results. Most were ordinary. Requests for files, meeting invitations, short replies about deadlines. The oldest messages were from several years earlier. They looked normal until I read them closely. Many were responses to conversations that did not exist. "Sure, I'll update it." "That works for me. I left it on your desk." The messages before them were missing. There were no deleted message notices. The replies simply appeared alone in the channels. I clicked on Evan's profile. We had no direct message history. A moment later, the screen refreshed. A message appeared between us from 8 months earlier. "Thanks for covering that meeting." Below it was my reply. "No problem." I did not remember writing either message. I took a screenshot. That evening, I opened the screenshot at home. The conversation was still visible. I felt better seeing it there. It meant the problem was real. A file did not have a faulty memory or a difficult morning. The next day, I showed it to Daniel. He looked at the screen. "What am I supposed to see?" "This conversation with Evan." "Yes, I don't remember it." Daniel shrugged. "I don't remember most of my Slack messages. Do you remember when he started?" "Evan?" "Yes." He looked toward the end of the row. Evan was feeding paper into the printer. "He's always been here," Daniel said. "People aren't always here. You know what I mean." "No." "I don't." Daniel's expression became uncomfortable. It was the expression people use when someone speaks too loudly in a quiet room. He lowered his voice. "Are you feeling okay?" After that, I stopped asking direct questions. Instead, I began watching. Evan arrived before most people. I never saw him enter, but his coat would be hanging behind his chair when I came in. He attended meetings. He drank coffee. He received mail in the internal envelopes we used between departments. His access card hung from a black cord around his neck. The photograph matched his face, but the employee number was partly worn away. Everyone spoke to him. Still, no one seemed to know anything about him. When people discussed their weekends, Evan listened. When someone asked what he had done, he gave a small answer that ended the conversation. Not much. Caught up on a few things. Stayed close to home. He never mentioned a street, a family member, a restaurant, or a place he wanted to visit. His desk had personal objects, but none felt personal. There was a mug without a logo, a closed notebook. A framed photograph turned slightly away from the aisle. One night, after Evan left, I walked past his desk. The photograph showed 6 people standing outside our office building. I recognized 4 of them. The 5th person was Evan. The 6th person stood near the edge of the frame. The image had been cut through the middle of their body, as if the photograph had once been wider. I picked up the frame. The air conditioning had shut off for the night. Without it, the silence felt thick. I could hear the small electrical buzz from Evan's sleeping monitor. The photograph was dated 3 years before I joined the company. The office building had not opened until 2 years later. I put the frame back exactly where I found it. Behind me, the printer started. A single sheet passed through the machine. It was blank. The printer stopped again. The following morning, the frame photograph was gone. A small plant stood in its place. I checked my phone for the picture I had taken, but I had not taken one. I remembered deciding to. I remembered holding my phone. There was no photograph in the gallery. That afternoon, I found an old seating plan in a shared folder. It had been created when our department moved to that floor. Every desk was marked with an employee's name. Evan's name appeared at the end of the last row. The recycling area was not shown. According to the plan, the desk had always been there. I printed the file. The page came out warm and smelled faintly of toner. I carried it to the end of the row. I placed it against the divider and compared the lines. The measurements did not make sense. There was not enough room for all the desks shown on the plan. The last row should have passed through the outer wall. I counted the ceiling tiles. Then I counted the spaces on the diagram. The office was almost 6 feet wider on paper. I checked the emergency floor plan beside the elevators. It showed the same thing. Evan came up behind me while I was looking at it. "Finding your way out?" he asked. He smiled. It was a kind of harmless joke anyone might make. "I'm checking the layout," I said. "Anything wrong?" "The dimensions don't fit." He looked at the floor plan. "They seem fine to me. Where were the recycling bins before your desk was put in?" He considered the question. Then he looked toward his workstation. "My desk has always been there." It was the same sentence everyone used. He did not sound defensive. He sounded patient. For the first time, I wondered if he knew what he was. The thought made me feel ashamed. He was only a man in an office. He answered emails. He attended meetings. He held doors for people carrying coffee. There was nothing frightening about him. The frightening part was how completely the world had made room. That night, I dreamed about the floor plan. In the dream, I kept unfolding it. Each fold revealed another row of desks. Every workstation had a name, a chair, and a glowing monitor. I could not see the end of the page. After that, I began leaving earlier. I no longer enjoyed the quiet office. When people put on their coats, I did the same. I rode down with the crowd and listened to ordinary conversations in the elevator. For a while, that helped. Ignorance had once protected me. Before Evan, the office was a fixed place. A desk was only a desk. A coworker was someone who had been hired, introduced, and added to the schedule. I had never understood how much comfort came from believing that every ordinary thing had an ordinary beginning. Once I noticed the error, I saw uncertainty everywhere. I counted desks each morning. Sometimes there were 18, sometimes there were 19. When I counted again, there were 17. I stopped trusting the numbers. Weeks passed. Evan became easier to accept. That frightened me more than the floor plan. I began including him on emails without thinking. When someone asked who could review a report, his name came to mind. Once, I found myself telling a new employee to ask Evan because he had been there longer than anyone. The words sounded natural. I almost believed them. A new intern joined our team at the beginning of the next month. Her name was Claire. Her desk was near mine. During her first week, she asked careful questions and wrote every answer in a small green notebook. One evening, we both stayed late. The office slowly emptied. Doors closed. The air conditioning shifted into its quiet and nighttime setting. Evan remained at his desk. His keyboard made the same slow pattern I remembered from the first night. Claire looked over the divider. "Can I ask you something strange?" she whispered. I felt cold before she continued. "Who is that man?" "Evan." "I know what his nameplate says." She lowered her voice further. His desk wasn't there during my interview. I looked toward the end of the row. Evan's monitor cast a pale rectangle across his face. Claire opened her notebook. She showed me a rough sketch of the office from her orientation. She had drawn the desks so she could remember where people sat. The last row ended at the printer. There was no desk beside it. For the first time in months, I felt relief. Someone else could see it. I told her not to ask anyone. I said we would talk outside the office. She nodded. The next morning, Claire was standing beside Evan's desk. They were looking at something on his monitor. She laughed when he spoke. Later, she sent me a Slack message. "Sorry about last night. I was tired." Of course Evan works here. I looked across the divider. Claire was watching me. Her face was pale. One hand rested on the green notebook. She slowly shook her head. Then she deleted the message. We have not spoken about it since. This morning, another desk appeared beside Evan's. It has a monitor, a phone, and a clean white nameplate. I cannot remember the name printed on it. I have read it several times. Everyone else has already begun saying good morning to the person who sits there. A few minutes ago, Claire passed my desk on her way to the printer. She left her green notebook beside my keyboard. There was only one sentence written on the open page. "When you stop noticing them, they make room for another." I looked toward the end of the row. For a moment, I could not remember which desk had appeared first. The stairs under the lobby. I started taking the stairs because the elevators were being repaired. I worked on the 14th floor of an office building. One elevator had been out of service for several weeks. The other two became crowded around the end of the day. The stairs were faster. At first, I only used them in the afternoon. I would leave my desk, tap my access card at the stairwell door, and begin the walk down. The stairwell was plain. The walls were grey concrete. A black metal handrail ran along both sides. Each landing had a heavy fire door, a floor number, and a red fire extinguisher cabinet. There were 11 steps between the upper landing and the turn. Then 11 more steps to the next floor. I counted them without meaning to. 11 down. Turn. 11 down. The sound of my shoes moved ahead of me and returned from below. The echoes were soft and hollow. Each fire door had a slightly different sound when it closed. The door on 12 made a sharp, metallic click. 9 dragged across the floor. 4 closed slowly and released a quiet sigh of air. The stairwell smelled of dry cement, old paint, and the faint rubber odor of the handrail. By the time I reached the lobby, my legs were warm and my head felt clearer. It became a habit. I began using the stairs even when the elevators were working. I knew how long the walk should take. From 14 to the lobby, it was a little under 5 minutes if I did not stop. I knew every landing. Someone had scratched a small star into the paint on 11. There was a dark water stain above 7. A strip of clear tape hung from the emergency light on 3. The building had one basement. B1 held storage rooms, electrical equipment, and part of the underground parking area. The public elevators went there. The stairwell continued one level beneath the lobby and ended at a secured metal door. There was nothing below B1. I never had a reason to go that far. The first unusual thing happened on a quiet evening. I had stayed late to finish a report. By the time I left, the office lights had switched to their nighttime setting. Only the central rows remained on. The stairwell was colder than usual. I descended from 14, listening to the familiar pattern of my footsteps. 11 steps. Turn. 11 steps. At the 10th floor, I noticed there were 12 steps after the landing. I stopped at the bottom and looked back. The flight appeared normal. The concrete steps were evenly spaced. There was no repair work or extra platform. I counted them again as I climbed halfway up. 12. I returned to the landing. It did not concern me. I had probably miscounted before. The height between floors could vary. Pipes, beams, and other structural features sometimes required small changes. On the next flight, there were 11 steps. The one after that had 13. By the time I reached the lobby, I had stopped counting. The glass door opened into the bright entrance area. The security guard was reading something on his phone. Rain tapped against the tall windows. Everything was ordinary. The next morning, I used the elevator. For several days, I avoided the stairs without admitting that I was avoiding them. Then the elevator stopped at every floor on the way down. People crowded inside. Someone's backpack pressed against my shoulder. A phone played music through cheap headphones. The stairs seemed more comfortable. That evening, I counted again. Every flight had 11 steps. The star was still scratched into the wall on 11. The water stain was above 7. The tape hung from the light on 3. I decided I had been tired. There is a great deal of comfort in a simple explanation. It does not need to be proven. It only needs to be easier than the alternative. After that, the stairwell remained normal for almost 2 weeks. Then I found the extra landing. It was between floors 6 and 5. I descended from 6, turned at the middle platform, and continued down. Instead of the 5th floor door, I reached another small landing. There was no door. A rectangular patch on the wall was painted a slightly darker shade of grey. It looked like a doorway had been covered with concrete. The stairs continued below it. I stood there for a while. The emergency light above me produced a thin, buzzing sound. I could feel the vibration through the metal handrail. The air smelled different. It was colder and carried a damp mineral odor, like stone after rain. I went down. The next landing was marked 5. I checked my phone. The walk between 6 and 5 had taken less than a minute. I had not lost track of time. I went back upstairs to look for the blank landing. There was nothing between 5 and 6. Only 2 flights of 11 steps and the usual turning platform. I returned to the office level and took the elevator down. The following day, I mentioned it to one of my coworkers. "There's a strange landing in the stairs," I said. "What kind of landing?" "One without a door." He shrugged. "Probably a service level. Between 5 and 6, maybe." He said it with no interest. The conversation ended. I understood his reaction. An extra landing was not frightening. Buildings contained maintenance spaces, utility closets, and sealed rooms. Most people lived peacefully beside things they did not understand. I had done the same. A wall was only a wall till you began asking what was behind it. A staircase was safe because everyone agreed that it connected 2 known places. Knowing less had made the building feel smaller. I missed that feeling. The next change happened after another late shift. The lobby door would not open. I reached the bottom of the stairs and pushed the metal bar. The door moved less than an inch before something stopped it. I tried my access card. The reader flashed red. Through the wired glass window, I could see the lobby. The security desk was empty. The front doors were locked for the night. A sign taped to the glass said, "To use the B1 exit during maintenance." I had never seen the sign before. It looked official. The company logo appeared at the bottom. The paper was clean and recently printed. I went down one more level. The B1 landing was colder. A large white letter and number were painted on the wall. B1. I tried the door. My card reader flashed red again. A second sign was taped behind the window. Exit access on lower level. Below the B1 landing, another flight of stairs continued downward. I had never noticed it. I was certain the stairwell ended at B1. I remembered the concrete wall beneath the last landing. I remembered a yellow mop bucket stored in the corner. Now there was a black handrail and 11 gray steps descending into weaker light. I considered going back to the office and calling security. My phone had 1 bar of signal. The building's security number was printed on the back of my access card. I called. The line rang several times, then disconnected. The battery showed almost 40%. The B1 door remained locked. Going down seemed easier than climbing 14 floors back to the office. I thought there might be another parking level. Perhaps B2 existed, but was not available through the public elevators. I descended. The next landing was labeled B2. A fire door stood in the wall. The paint was newer than the door. There was no card reader. I pulled the handle. The door opened a few inches. Beyond it was a dark service corridor with exposed pipes. A row of ceiling lights extended into the distance. None of them were on. The air that entered the stairwell smelled of rust, standing water, and something warm and electrical. I closed the door. The stairs continued down. At B3, there was no door. Only a fire extinguisher cabinet. The glass was dusty. The cabinet was empty. B4 had a door with a wide window. I could see another corridor beyond it. This one was carpeted. A water cooler stood against the far wall. For a moment, I thought I could hear office phones ringing somewhere in the darkness. I did not open that door. The stairs below B4 were different. There were 14 steps before the turn and 16 after it. The handrail was painfully cold. Moisture gathered beneath my palm. At B5 I checked my phone. There was no signal. The time had advanced by 7 minutes. My legs already felt as if I had descended far more than 5 levels. My knees had begun to ache. The muscles in my calves tightened every time I stepped down. I kept going. Beat. The painted numbers became smaller. The signs were still clean, but the walls around them looked older. Hairline cracks ran through the concrete. The emergency lights gave off a weak green glow. Their low electrical hum followed me from landing to landing. I began hearing footsteps below. They were slow. Each step arrived a moment before mine. When I stopped, the sound below stopped too. I told myself it was an echo. Stairwells carried sound in confusing ways. My own footsteps could travel through the concrete and return from a different direction. I continued. The footsteps below continued first. At B11, I found a paper coffee cup on the landing. The cup was white with a brown cardboard sleeve. There was no brand printed on it. A small amount of liquid remained inside. I touched the side. It was warm. I looked through the door window. There was no corridor beyond it. There was another stairwell. The stairs on the other side of the glass descended in the same direction as mine. The walls were the same gray concrete. The same green emergency lights hung above each landing. A person was moving down several levels below. I could only see the top of a dark coat when they passed beneath the lights. They did not look up. I let go of the door handle. The figure continued downward until the light no longer reached it. I remained on B11 for several minutes. The warm cup slowly cooled in my hand. I finally left it where I had found it and continued down. That decision still bothers me. I could have turned around. I knew the stairs above me led back toward the office. I had no proof they would take me there, but they were at least familiar. Instead, I wanted to find the bottom. Uncertainty had become more difficult to tolerate than fear. I needed the stairwell to end. B12 had 23 steps. B13 had 30. At B14, the middle platform was wide enough to hold a desk. There was nothing on it except a rolling office chair facing the wall. B5 had no floor sign. The door there was warm. I heard the low vibration of machinery behind it. B16 was painted on the floor instead of the wall. At B17 I found an evacuation map. It was mounted beneath a clear plastic cover. Red lines showed the stairs, fire doors, and emergency routes. A small dot marked my position. You are here. The diagram showed B17 in the center. Above it were B16, B16, and the rest of the building. Below it were more levels. B20. The list continued to B43. At the bottom of the map, a red arrow pointed downward and passed beyond the edge of the printed page. There was no explanation beside it. I stared at that arrow for a long time. The building above me had 14 floors. I had already walked farther downward than the entire visible structure rose above the street. I thought about foundations and bedrock. I thought about buried pipes and the weight of the earth. Those ideas belonged to the world I understood. The map did not. The unknown was not empty. That was what frightened me. It had doors, numbers, lights, and evacuation instructions. Someone had planned for it, or something had learned how plans were supposed to look. I turned around. The climb back was slow. My legs shook. My breathing sounded too loud inside the concrete shaft. I did not count the floors. I kept one hand on the rail and watched the numbers decrease. B4. At some point, the footsteps returned below me. They were climbing now. They remained several floors behind. I did not look down through the center of the stairwell. After what felt like more than an hour, I reached B1. The door opened with my access card. The lobby was on the other side. The maintenance sign was gone. The security guard looked up as I entered. He asked why I was coming from the basement. I told him the lobby door had been locked. He tested it. The door opened normally. I did not tell him about the lower levels. The elevators were repaired the next week. I have used them ever since. I do not take stairs down. Not at work, not in parking garages, and not in apartment buildings. If there is no elevator, I stay where I am until someone can help. Several months have passed. Last week, a new directory appeared beside the lobby elevators. It lists every department in the building. B1 is marked storage and parking. Beneath it is a thin black line. Yesterday, another line appeared below the first. This morning, there were 3, no forenames. No numbers, only short horizontal marks descending toward the bottom of the sign. Most people do not notice them. They press the elevator button, check their phones, and wait. I envy them. This evening, I watched a maintenance worker unlock the stairwell door. He carried a toolbox and a long coil of cable. Before he entered, I asked which floor he was going to. He looked down at the work order in his hand. Then he looked through the open door. The emergency lights continued below the lobby in a green, fading line. I don't know, he said. He sounded tired. The bottom floor number keeps changing. 5, the drain answers. When the water stops. My bathroom is small enough that I can touch both walls if I stretch out my arms. The sink is on the left. The bathtub is against the far wall, with a shower curtain hanging from a metal rod. There is a narrow mirror cabinet above the sink and a ventilation fan in the ceiling. The floor is covered with pale square tiles. In winter, they are cold enough to hurt my feet. I live alone, so my evening routine is quiet. I brush my teeth, turn on the shower, and leave a clean towel over the radiator. The hot water takes about 30 seconds to arrive. I usually stand with one hand beneath the stream and wait for the temperature to change. The pipes make ordinary sounds. They click when they warm. They hum when another apartment uses water. Sometimes the bathtub drain gurgles after the washing machines run somewhere in the building. I never thought much about those sounds. Plumbing is one of those systems people trust without understanding. Water appears when we turn a handle. It disappears through a hole. Most of us are happier if we do not imagine the distance between those two things. The first strange sound came from the sink. I was brushing my teeth before bed. When I finished, I rinsed the basin and turned off the faucet. The water spun around the drain and vanished. A moment later, something below the sink made 3 soft sounds. Gulp, gulp, gulp. There was a pause, then 2 more. I looked down. A few drops of water clung to the white porcelain. The metal drain cover reflected the bathroom light. Nothing else happened. I assumed air had moved through the pipe. The next evening, it happened again. 3 wet sounds after the sink emptied. A pause, then 2. The timing was so exact that I waited for the second group. When it came, I felt an odd relief. I had predicted it. That made it less strange. For the next week, the sink made the same pattern every night. 3 sounds. A pause. 2 sounds. It only happened after I brushed my teeth. It did not happen when I washed my hands or ran the faucet during the day. I began listening for it. That was the first mistake, if mistakes can begin with something so small. One night, I tapped the side of the sink 3 times with the handle of my toothbrush. The sound traveled through the porcelain. The drain answered twice. I stood very still. The ventilation fan hummed above me. Water moved inside the wall behind the shower. From another apartment came the dull sound of a cabinet closing. I tapped once. There was a long pause. The drain made one low, bubbling sound. I put the toothbrush back in its cup. I did not try again that night. The following morning, the bathroom smelled faintly of metal. It was not a strong smell. It reminded me of old coins held in a warm hand. I ran the sink until the water became cold. The smell faded. After work, I bought a bottle of drain cleaner. I poured some into the sink and waited. The liquid moved slowly around the metal cover. A chemical odor filled the room. Nothing came back up. I flushed the pipe with hot water. The drain remained quiet. I slept well that night. In the morning, there was condensation on the mirror cabinet. The rest of the bathroom was dry. I had not used the shower. The radiator was cold, and the ventilation fan was off. The fog covered only a small oval area in the center of the mirror. 3 clear lines had formed through it. They looked like finger marks. I wiped the mirror with a towel. The glass beneath was cold. I called the building office and asked them to send someone to inspect the plumbing. A plumber came 2 days later. He removed the curved pipe beneath the sink and placed a plastic bucket under it. A small amount of grey water spilled out. The pipe was clear. He checked the bathtub drain, the water pressure, and the ventilation fan. He told me the building shared a vertical drain stack. Sounds travel, he said. You might be hearing someone above or below you. I asked him how many apartments shared the pipe. Most of this side of the building. Could someone make a sound through it? He looked at me. What kind of sound? Like tapping. Pipes tap. I did not explain further. Before leaving, he tightened the faucet and replaced a rubber seal beneath the sink. The bathroom smelled of his work gloves and the sharp grease he used on the fitting. For several nights, the sound stopped. Then I took a long shower. It had been a cold day. I kept the water hotter than usual and stood beneath it until my skin turned pink. Steam gathered near the ceiling. The mirror disappeared behind a white layer of fog. Beads of water collected on the tiles and ran down in thin lines. When I turned off the shower, I heard the bathtub draining. The sound was normal at first. Water moved through the pipe with a deep, hollow rush. Then the drain inhaled. That is the only word that fits. The sound was slow and wet. It began somewhere beneath the tub and pulled downward through the metal cover. A second sound followed. It was quieter. It resembled someone releasing a breath through their nose. I stood inside the bathtub with water cooling around my feet. The shower curtain touched my arm. The plastic felt cold and unpleasant against my wet skin. I stepped out and reached for my towel. There were words on the fob tiles beside the mirror. Still warm. The letters were uneven. Each one had formed where the condensation had thinned. I stared at them until the edges began to soften. Water slid through the letter S. The words slowly lost their shape. I wiped the tiles dry. I checked the mirror, the wall, and the ceiling. There were no marks beneath the moisture. I slept on the couch that night. The next morning, the bathroom looked ordinary. My towel was where I had left it. The shower curtain was dry. The drain cover sat flat against the bathtub. I told myself the words had not been words. Condensation creates shapes. Human beings find patterns in random things. We see faces in windows and letters in stains. It is an old habit of the mind. We prefer a frightening pattern to no pattern at all, because a pattern suggests rules. For a while, I believed that explanation. Then the bathroom began answering questions. I did not intend to ask the first one. I was washing my hands after work. The day had been difficult. I had made a mistake on a report and spent most of the afternoon correcting it. "I'm tired," I said aloud. I often speak to myself when I am alone. The sink drained. From the pipe came two soft sounds. I listened. A third followed. "You too?" I asked. The drain gurgled once. I should have left the room. Instead, I leaned against the sink and waited. Nothing else happened. The next evening, I spoke again. "Are you in the pipes?" No answer came. I ran the faucet for several seconds and turned it off. The water disappeared. The room became quiet. Then moisture appeared around the drain cover. It gathered in a thin ring. Small drops pushed upward through the openings, though the pipe had just emptied. A smell of wet stone entered the room. The drops trembled. 3 of them moved across the basin. They left narrow trails in the porcelain. "Not in." The words were small and incomplete, but I understood them. I wiped the sink with toilet paper. The paper smelled faintly of rust. After that, I tried to stop paying attention. I brushed my teeth in the kitchen. I took shorter showers. I kept the bathroom door closed. It did not help. The pipes clicked when I passed in the hallway. The bathtub drain made low sounds while I was trying to sleep. Sometimes the ventilation fan turned slowly even though the switch was off. I began placing the rubber plug over the sink drain. Each morning, I found it beside the faucet. The plug was always wet. I bought a second plug for the bathtub. It was thick and heavy, with a metal ring in the center. The first night, it remained in place. The second morning, it had shifted half an inch. A thin line of water surrounded it. On the third night, I placed a full bottle of shampoo on top of the plug. When I woke, the bottle was still upright. The plug was beneath it. Water had gathered inside the bathtub until it covered the bottom. The water was warm. I had not used a shower since the previous morning. I crouched beside the tub and touched the surface with one finger. A vibration moved through the water. 3 pulses. A pause. 2 pulses. I pulled my hand away. The water remained still. That evening, I came home and found the bathroom filled with steam. The door was closed. The light was off. Warm moisture touched my face when I entered. The mirror and tiles were completely fogged. Water ran down the walls. The air smelled of chlorine, iron, and the faint sour odor of a drain that had not been cleaned. The shower was not running. The faucet was dry. Words covered the mirror. I did not look at my reflection. The glass was too fogged to show one. The letters filled almost the entire surface. Where, you. I opened the window above the bathtub and turned on the fan. The The steam moved slowly toward the ceiling. "I was at work," I said. I spoke without deciding to. The drain answered once. I felt embarrassed afterward. Not frightened. Embarrassed. That was worse. I had started treating the sounds as if they came from someone I owed an explanation. Over the next few weeks, the bathroom became part of my evening in a different way. I still avoided long showers, but I spent more time near the sink. Sometimes I sat on the closed toilet lid and listened to water move through the walls. The sounds were not words. They never became a voice. They were pressure changes, bubbles, clicks, and slow movements beneath the drains. Still, I began to understand their moods. A quick series of taps meant impatience. A long pull of air through the bathtub drain meant it wanted the water hotter. 3 sounds, followed by 2, meant it was waiting for me to respond. I knew how unreasonable that was. I also knew the bathroom felt less empty when it answered. That was the part I did not tell anyone. Living alone is quiet. Most of the time, I prefer it. But there are nights when the absence of another person becomes a physical thing. The bathroom responded. It noticed when I came home. It noticed when I stayed away. It seemed to know when I was tired. I began running the shower before bed, even when I did not need one. I let steam fill the room. Then I wrote questions on the fogged tiles with my fingertip. "Ayer you below me?" The condensation shifted. "Enia. What do you want?" The next answer took several minutes. "Warm." I stopped asking after that. One morning, I noticed the skin on my fingertips was wrinkled. I had not touched water. The bathroom smelled strongly of wet concrete. My toothbrush was damp. The towel on the radiator felt warm against my hand. I called the building office again. They checked the apartment above mine and the one below. No one had reported a leak. The apartment beneath mine had been empty for several months. I asked if I could see it. They refused. That evening, the bathtub drain produced a slow, please sound when I returned. I did not turn on the light. "I know," I said. "I am not sure what I meant." The pipes clicked softly behind the wall. The sound stopped 4 nights ago. The drains have been silent since then. No tapping. No breathing. No words in the steam. At first I felt relieved. Then I began running the water longer, waiting for an answer. I tapped the sink with my toothbrush. Nothing replied. I wrote, "Are you there?" on the fogged mirror. The letters faded without changing. The bathroom has started to feel empty again. Last night, I woke in bed to 3 soft taps. They did not come from the bathroom. They came from inside the wall behind my pillow. There was a pause. Before I was fully awake, I raised my hand and tapped the wall twice. The plaster beneath my knuckles was warm. From the bathroom, the drain remained silent. It no longer needed to call me from there. Six, there was one more person on the roof. I started going to the roof because my apartment stayed warm at night. The building's heating system was old. Once it turned on for the season, it did not seem to care what the weather was doing outside. Even with the windows open, my bedroom felt close and dry. The roof was cooler. The door was at the top of the main stairwell. Residents were allowed to use it as long as we did not block the vents or leave anything near the access hatch. I usually went up before bed. The rooftop was broad and flat. Pale gravel covered most of the surface. A low parapet wall ran around the edge. There were 2 large air conditioning units, several silver ventilation ducts, and an old water tank behind a metal fence. Someone had tied a clothesline between 2 pipes, although I never saw anything hanging from it. At night, the city looked calm from up there. Traffic moved along the streets below. Red lights blinked on distant buildings. The air carried a steady mixture of engines, ventilation fans, and faraway voices. The gravel made a dry crunch beneath my shoes. I would stand near the roof door for 10 or 15 minutes, then I would go back downstairs. The first man appeared on a Tuesday. He stood beyond the air conditioning units, facing the northern side of the city. He was an ordinary-looking man in a gray coat. His hands rested at his sides. His shoulders were relaxed. He was not close to the parapet. He stood several feet away from it, looking toward a group of dark buildings in the distance. I assumed he lived in the building. "Cold night," I said. He did not answer. The air conditioning unit hummed between us. A thin plastic bag moved across a neighboring roof and caught against a pipe. I waited for him to turn around. He did not. After a minute, I moved farther away and looked at the city. When I left, he was still standing in the same position. The next night, there were 2 people on the roof. The man in the gray coat stood in the same place. A woman stood several feet to his right. She wore a long cardigan over what looked like sleep clothes. Her hair moved in the wind, but the rest of her body remained still. Both faced north. Neither acknowledged me. I recognized the woman. She lived on the 6th floor. I had held the lobby door for her several times when she was carrying grocery bags. "Hi," I said. She did not respond. I walked to the opposite side of the roof. From there, I could see both of them in profile. Their faces seemed calm. Their eyes remained open. They were looking at the same part of the skyline. There was nothing unusual in that direction. A row of office buildings blocked most of the horizon. Above them was a wide section of dark sky. No bright sign. No construction crane. No unusual light. Still, their attention made the empty space seem important. I went downstairs. The following morning, I saw the woman from 6 checking her mail. "Were you on the roof last night?" I asked. She looked at me for a moment. "I don't think so." "You were standing near the air conditioning units." She smiled politely. "I was probably getting some air." "Who was the man with you?" "What man?" The elevator arrived. She stepped inside and pressed 6. The conversation ended before I could ask anything else. That night, there were 3 people. The new person was a young man wearing office clothes. His access card lanyard still hung around his neck. He stood to the left of the man in the grey coat. The 3 figures were evenly spaced. The wind moved around them. Their coats and hair shifted, but none of them changed position. I counted them twice. 1, 2, 3. They all faced the same dark area above the northern buildings. I did not go closer. Over the next week, the number increased each night. 4, 5, 6. The people were not strangers. I recognized some from the elevator or the lobby. A woman from the 10th floor joined on the 4th night. A maintenance worker appeared on the 5th. On the 6th night, an older man stood among them in slippers and a heavy winter coat. Each new person found a place in the line. The original man remained near the center. No one spoke. No one looked at anyone else. They simply stood together beneath the moving air, watching something I could not see. They did not remain there all night. I began checking from my apartment window, which gave me a partial view of the roof access structure. Around the same time each morning, people returned downstairs in small groups. They walked normally. They opened the door, entered the stairwell, and went back to their apartments. During the day, they behaved as they always had. They went to work. They collected packages. They carried laundry to the basement. When I asked about the roof, most gave vague answers. I needed some air. I couldn't sleep. The view is nice. None of them remembered who had been standing beside them. None could describe what they had been looking at. A woman named Rachel was the first person to admit that something was wrong. She lived across the hall from me. We had spoken many times about the noise from the pipes and the unreliable heating. One evening, I found her near the roof door. She was looking through the small wide glass window. There were 9 people outside. "You see them too," she said. It was not a question. Yes, have you spoken to them? They don't answer. She looked through the glass again. The group formed a loose line beyond the ventilation ducts. Why are they standing like that? I don't know. Rachel opened the door. Cold air entered the stairwell. The metal hinges gave a long, tired creak. The 9 people did not turn. Rachel stepped onto the gravel. I followed her as far as the doorway. She approached the group slowly. Is everything okay? She called. No one moved. She walked around to face them. For several seconds, she stood with her back to the northern skyline, looking into their faces. Her expression changed. It was not fear. It was closer to confusion. Then the confusion softened. She looked over her shoulder toward the dark section of sky. I called her name. She turned back to me. I'm coming, she said. We went downstairs together. Inside the elevator, she rubbed her arms and said she felt cold. What did you see? I asked. Nothing. What were they looking at? I don't know. She sounded honest. The next night, there were 10 people on the roof. Rachel stood at the far end of the line. I watched her from the doorway. She did not respond when I called her name. After that, other residents began noticing. Someone left a note on the bulletin board in the lobby. Please, keep the roof access door closed at night. Another person wrote beneath it. W.A. Fruple. Gathering up there? The building office sent an email reminding residents that parties were not allowed on the roof. It was not a party. There was no music, food, or conversation. The number continued to grow. 11, 12, 13. Some nights, other residents came to watch from the stairwell. They whispered questions. They recorded short videos on their phones. The videos showed exactly what we saw. A line of people standing in the dark. The recordings never captured what they were facing. The northern sky appeared as a flat patch of black surrounded by city light. Several people posted the videos in the building's private message group. The conversations followed the same pattern. People expressed concern. They made jokes. They suggested sleepwalking, meditation, or some kind of social media trend. Then, one by one, the people who commented appeared on the roof. Once they joined the line, they stopped posting. The building office installed a new lock on the roof door. For one night, no one could go up. The group gathered in the top floor hallway instead. 23 people stood facing the closed metal door. They remained silent. The emergency light gave their faces a pale green color. The stairwell smelled of dust, cold concrete, and damp coats. No one touched the lock. No one tried to force the door. They only waited. The following morning, the building office removed the lock. The next night, all 23 returned to the roof. There was room for them. There always seemed to be room. As the group grew, the line changed shape. It curved around the air conditioning units and continued toward the water tank. Everyone faced the same direction. I began avoiding the roof. I closed my bedroom window so I would not hear the access door opening above me. Still, I could hear the footsteps. They came through the ceiling in slow groups. The door creaked. Gravel moved beneath many pairs of shoes. Then everything became quiet. The silence was worse than the footsteps. The normal city sound seemed to fade when the group was in place. Traffic became distant. The ventilation system lowered into a slow mechanical pulse. Even from my apartment, I could feel their stillness above me. It had weight. I slept badly. Sometimes I woke with the feeling that I had forgotten an appointment. I would sit in bed trying to remember where I was supposed to be. My eyes always moved toward the ceiling. I began thinking about the empty section of sky. Before the first man appeared, it had been nothing. I had looked in that direction many times without seeing a reason to care. Now I knew people were gathering beneath it. That knowledge changed the emptiness. The unknown is easier to live with when no one points toward it. Once enough people agree that nothing contains something, ignorance becomes difficult to recover. I missed the nights when the roof had been only gravel, ducks, and wind. I returned after the count reached 30. I told myself I wanted to know how many there were. The roof door opened with its usual metal groan. 30 people stood outside. Rachel was near the water tank. The woman from 6 stood beside her. The original man in the gray coat remained in the center. None of them looked tired. Their faces were calm and empty of expectation. I stayed near the door. The wind moved across the gravel and pressed my shirt against my back. Then it stopped. The city became quiet, not completely quiet. I could still hear the air conditioning units and the low movement of traffic, but those sounds seemed farther away. The dark area above the northern buildings appeared larger than I remembered. It was not darker than the surrounding sky. It was simply more difficult to look away from. I felt no command. There was no voice or visible shape. I only felt that I had arrived late. A space had been left between Rachel and the woman beside her. It was wide enough for one person. I stepped back into the stairwell and closed the door. For several nights, I stayed with a friend. I did not tell him why. When I returned, there were notices beneath many apartment doors. The building office was trying to confirm how many residents still lived there. Mail had collected in several boxes. Deliveries waited in the lobby. During the day, the building felt unusually quiet. At night, the footsteps began again. I checked the fire safety roster beside the front desk. The building had 62 registered residents. That evening, I went to the roof and counted 61 people. I was the only resident not standing with them. No one had forced me upstairs. No one had knocked on my door. Still, I understood that the empty space in the line belonged to me. I went back to my apartment. I turned on the television. I made coffee. I opened a book and read the same paragraph several times. Above me, 61 people stood without speaking. The ceiling seemed very thin. I do not remember deciding to leave my apartment. I remember the stairwell. I remember the cold handrail beneath my palm and the green emergency lights above each landing. The roof door was already open. The group made room without moving. I stood in the space between Rachel and the woman from 6. The gravel shifted beneath my shoes. The wind became still. From inside the line, the northern sky did not look empty. I cannot describe it more clearly than that. There was nothing visible. That is still true. But nothing should not feel as if it is looking back. I do not know how long we stood there. The city lights dimmed. The air conditioning units hummed. 62 people breathed slowly in the cold. Then the roof door opened. A man I had never seen before stepped outside. He held his phone in one hand. He looked from face to face and began counting us. When he reached 62, he counted again. "Are you all residents?" he asked. No one answered. He looked frightened, but he did not leave. He walked closer. I wanted to warn him not to look north. Instead, I remained still with the others. The man stopped beside me. There was already a space waiting for him. Tomorrow night, there will be 63. That's where the story ends. But you know how it is. Some things never really end. If it sent a chill down your spine, leave a like, and let someone else lose sleep too. Subscribe to the channel. I have many more stories waiting to be told once you turn off the lights.